In 1931, the year Charles Lucky Luciano started the commission, Anastasia carried a murder order to his lieutenant, Louis Capone, who assigned the hit to Abe Kid Twist Reles. As Reles recalled later, after driving to the intended victim's residence, by 1935, when he was 28 years old, newspapers pegged Kid Twist as the head of the Reles mob. Reporters also referred to him as the vice president of Murder, Inc. His top hitmen were Martin Bugsy Goldstein and the kill-crazed Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss. Reles had his torpedoes and wheelmen rehearse their movements to make hits come as close to flawless as possible. His reputation spread within the corridors of the underworld, and the top mafiosis in New York asked him to take contract hits beyond Brooklyn. His knowledge of those responsible for hits, such as Mendy Weiss's role in the 1935 murder of Dutch Schultz, expanded as well. His incredible recall of details of scores of unsolved killings would be of great benefit to the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. Reles would, as no one before, expose the National Crime Syndicate covering Chicago, Denver, St. Louis, Kansas City, and other cities that requested contract killings from Buckhalter and Anastasia. One of the lesser-known hitmen inside Murder, Inc. would join Reles in testifying against their former lieutenants and associates. Albert Tannenbaum, nicknamed TikTok, was a Jewish-American hitman for Murder, Inc. After a stint as a salesman, he began work at the Loch Sheldrake Country Club, which was owned by his father. When Tannenbaum was 25, he met a guest at the club by the name of Jacob Garage Shapiro, a close associate of Buckhalter. Shapiro felt that Tannenbaum had what it took to become a mob hitman and introduced him to the underworld. Perhaps the most high-profile murder in which Tannenbaum participated in was that of Harry Greenberg. Harry Big Greenie Greenberg was a Murder, Inc. associate, gunned down in his Ford convertible coupe. Greenberg was raised on Manhattan's Lower East Side with future Murder, Inc. leaders Lepke Buckhalter and Jacob Garage Shapiro. Greenberg was deported by federal agents in 1935. He jumped ship before reaching his native Poland. Returning to North America, he settled for a time in Montreal. While there, he mailed a letter to the syndicate, threatening to turn government evidence against his New York mobster allies if his demand for $5,000 to maintain his silence regarding past crimes was not met. Tannenbaum had been assigned to the hit by Buckhalter, who at the time was on the lam from New York District Attorney Thomas E. Dewey and was trying to eliminate potential witnesses that Dewey could use against him. Tannenbaum followed Greenberg first to Montreal and then to Detroit, before a Murder, Inc. hit team finally caught up with him in Los Angeles. November 22nd, 1939. Frankie Carbeau, Whitey Krakow, and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel pulled into the driveway at 1804 North Vista Del Mar on Thanksgiving Eve, at which time Carbeau shot Greenberg in the head 5 times. By 1940, pursuant to constant pressure from Brooklyn authorities, along with testimonies pouring out of Abe Reles connecting Tannenbaum to the Greenberg killing, Ali TikTok made a complete 180 of his allegiance to his criminal colleagues and joined Reles in the stool pigeon coop. He spent nearly a year at the Half Moon Hotel on Coney Island, along with Reles and Sholin Bernstein, under police protection, while the Brooklyn District Attorney William O'Dwyer prepared his case. He was also flown out to Los Angeles, along with Reles, to testify in the case against Siegel in the Greenberg killing, though Siegel managed to squeeze out with an acquittal. Tannenbaum eventually testified in the trial against Louis Buchalter, working up the courage to stare into the face of the man he had admired so long ago, providing enough incriminating evidence to send Lepke to the electric chair. In the spring of 1940, headlines about a contract killing squad based out of Brooklyn splashed across the front page of countless newspapers throughout the country. The coverage introduced America to a colorful cast of hitmen and outlandish courtroom revelations. The DA put Kid Twist on the witness stand in 3 trials of Murder Inc.'s so-called cash and berry killers. First, at the trial for co-defendants Mayone and Abindondo, Reles acknowledged his complicity with the 2 men in the murder of George Rudnick, a suspected informant stabbed 60-plus times with an ice pick and smashed over the head with a meat cleaver in a garage in Brooklyn in 1937. Buchalter, prosecutors said, dispatched his hitmen to kill the low-level hood Rudnick as a warning to others tempted to sing. To make it into the papers, Buchalter had them set a note on the bloodied body reading, with the forged signature of Thomas E. Dewey, New York's district attorney. By the time Brooklyn's district attorney William O'Dwyer began whisking into custody purported members of this sordid syndicate, strange tales emerged in short order, particularly from the first-hand accounts of Murder Inc. employees, Abe Kid Twist Reles, Anthony Duke Maffatore, and Abe Pretty Levine. Once the DA's office sorted out a number of the decade-long list of unsolved murders and the hierarchy of this sadistic enforcement arm of New York's mobsters, the stories revealed an almost inconceivable degree of premeditation and brutality. They ranged from cruel to just plain weird. Police booked alleged murderers Harry Mayone, Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, and Frank the Dasher Abindondo on March 7, 1940. Based on information gained from the flapping lips of former Murder Inc. members turned witnesses, authorities expected indictments on all 3 for the 1937 ice pick and meat cleaver murder of low-level hoodlum and suspected stoolie George Whitey Rudnick. Lured into joining Abindondo and his fellow hitmen on a car theft caper, once the vehicles were boosted and stowed away in a garage, the killers turned on Rudnick, choking him. With the strangulation over, the men began stuffing Rudnick back into their vehicle, only to hear coughing coming from the corpse. To finish Rudnick off, Strauss stabbed him 63 times with an ice pick, while Mayone buried a meat cleaver in his skull. Prosecutors later severed Strauss from the Rudnick murder charge, but paired him with co-defendant Martin Bugsy Goldstein for the equally heinous 1939 murder of Irving Puggy Feinstein. Reles then testified in the trial that doomed his former crime partners, Martin Goldstein and Harry Strauss. He described how he helped both guys stab and strangle Irving Puggy Feinstein, a Jewish-American mobster involved in illegal gambling and labor racketeering with Buchalter. Puggy had made the mistake of attempting to move into turf, which was not his own. The murder occurred in the living room of Reles' own house on East 91st Street in Brooklyn. While Harry Strauss was ice-picking Puggy Feinstein to death, Puggy fought back and took a few bites out of Strauss's finger. Irate over the turn of events, Strauss and a few of his co-workers decided to make Feinstein's demise more painful and lengthened. They did so by a process which incorporates a rope being looped around the victim's neck and feet, so that as he struggled, he would slowly strangle himself. Still aggravated over the wound on his finger, Strauss and his associates took the body to a vacant lot and set it on fire. While the details of Rudnick's agonizing ordeal fell squarely into the realm of indignant ruthlessness, the killing of 2 Union men in 1939 demonstrated the tenacity and meticulous planning the hired guns were capable of. The seedy details, provided largely by Angelo Castellano and Joe the Baker Liberto, were aired by Assistant District Attorney Burton Turkis. During the high drama of courtroom sparring, Mayone was cocky, while Turkis was snarky. The accusations and testimony shed light on one of the most bizarre criminal escapades the gang ever executed. Turkis continued a barrage of queries into Mayone's criminal past, from homicide to rape to plots against witnesses. Mayone, visibly angered by every caustic question, shot back. Throughout the verbal brawling, defense attorney David Price frequently and desperately pleaded. Louis Lepke Buckhalter's rackets in New York ran the gamut, from textiles to narcotics. And when trouble brewed, or people resisted gangland control, bad things happened. This time involved the Plasterers Union, Local 65 of the Hod Carriers Building and Common Laborers Union. Specifically, some members felt they should not have to pay the mob any dues, a $1 a day kickback. When Lepke got wind of the insurrection, he sent word down the ranks to the boys in the enforcement department to rectify the situation. They delegated the job to a few men within the union itself. The intended victim was Collegiero Veruso. The union men involuntarily elected to eliminate the troublemaker were Cesar Lautaro and Antonio Siciliano. Neither of the plasterers wanted to take part, and went so far as to warn Veruso, who in turn mentioned his knowledge of the plot to another man, who happened to be tight with Gazuale Capone, a union delegate and also the brother of Murder Inc. middleman Louis Capone. Veruso was promised safety if he ceased running his mouth about the alleged threat and kickback. In a further good faith offering, the Hoods invited him to a party at 88 Central Avenue, the home of gangster Sabatino Aloy. On February 2nd, 1939, Veruso took the bait and found himself cornered by 4 men, Aloy among them. The men pummeled Veruso while haphazardly attempting to bring about his death via twine garrote. Party guests heard the screams, which sent the perpetrators fleeing before completing the job. The police arrested the 4 culprits eventually, but in the frequent revolving door of 1930s justice, the case was dismissed. But Murder Inc. still had Lautaro and Siciliano in their crosshairs. The 2 union men had failed to carry out their orders to silence Caruso. Murder Inc. had no intention of letting their boss down a second time. Cesar Lautaro and Antonio Siciliano were well versed in how the mafia operated and the fury their previous disobedience could bring to them. With that knowledge ever present in their minds, the men maintained a one-eye open existence at all times. They were extremely cautious and made Murder Inc. hitmen truly have to work hard to catch them off guard. The primary members of the hit squad resolved to calling a meeting to discuss finding a way to get the duo alone and in shooting distance. There, of course, had to be some weakness to exploit. They thought, and they found one. Lautaro and Siciliano liked the ladies, or so their reputation as playboys around town suggested. The murderous plotters took that information into consideration, realizing it was possibly the best shot at whacking the disobedient pair. At some point during the group discussion, they settled on the idea of disguising one of their own as a woman. Mayone, whose stature best suited the masquerade's requirements, was chosen. A female go-between, of whom both the stalkers and the stalked were familiar, set the stage, telling Lautaro and Siciliano that a blind date would be paying them a visit. On the evening of February 6th, 1939, Harry Happy Mayone, Frank Abendondo, and Vito Chickenhead Guarino prepared for the job. From lipstick to a white blouse, blue skirt to heeled shoes, Guarino's wife, Gertrude, provided all the feminine accoutrements to transform Murder Inc. hitman Harry Mayone into a believable lady caller. He kept his most precious accessory, a .38 revolver, concealed within a fur wrap. The trio arrived at the address in separate vehicles. Mayone and Abendondo rode together. Guarino's primary duty was to drive the diversionary crash car, and if necessary, provide backup. Mayone knocked on the apartment door. Siciliano let the lady in, but quickly realized his grave error in doing so. Mayone brandished his firearm. Abendondo charged in from behind, Guarino behind him. Mayone and Abendondo fired 4 rounds into Siciliano's back, but not before he reached the bathroom door, releasing his pet bulldog. The canine was shot twice, by Guarino, who was later lambasted in newspapers for, among other despicable exploits, violating underworld code for killing the victim's dog. Cesar Lautaro, asleep in the bedroom, took 2 bullets to the back of the head. Several days later, the same homicidal entourage ambushed and killed a 4th dissident, Felice Esposito, only this time without the makeup and women's clothes. September 23rd, 1940. The fat man was scared stiff. It was night and the police were after him. So were his former associates, out for blood. For nearly 7 months he had been on the lam, sleeping in flop houses, always moving. He had no tie. His hat and coat were gone. When he came to a church, he went inside. It was dark in there. He was still scared. Too scared. In the empty, still church, he began to scream. There, the startled receptionist of Manhattan's Roman Catholic Church of the Guardian Angel found this abject rotund of a man and went to fetch Father Rinchler. The shuddering fat man looked up and shrieked. Father Rinchler called the police, who dragged the sanctuary seeker away, still gobbling like a terrified turkey. At the station house, the fat man yammered and foamed. The police shut him up. They didn't have to ask who he was. They knew. Vito Guarino, 33, ex-baker, top triggerman of the Brooklyn hit squad, who, for a price, murdered underworld characters for rival gangs. They had been looking for him. 2 of his bosses were in the death house at Sing Sing. 2 more were on trial. Others awaiting trial for their parts in the 80-plus murders. 6 policemen had to carry the terrified Guarino to the squad car that whisked him away to District Attorney O'Dwyer's office. Once his 250-pound bulk was larded into a chair before the district attorney, Vito Guarino, slavering, quaking, poured out his confessional guts. For nearly 7 months, he had had no one to confide in. Mr. O'Dwyer got an earful. At the close of a 15-hour session, the squat gunman had confessed to 3 murders, implicated himself in 4 more. On one shooting expedition, he had been with Harry Happy Mayone and Frank the Dasher Abendondo, now awaiting the electric chair at Sing Sing. The fall of Murder, Inc. was a continuously unfolding event, with convictions, executions, and appeals continuing well into 1944. But 1941 proved to be the fateful year for most of the core individuals. Burton Turkis, Assistant District Attorney, spearheaded efforts to swiftly prosecute, beginning in the spring of 1940. He had the defendants tried in groups or pairs. The testimony of turncoats such as Reles, Tannenbaum, and Magoon had a devastating effect. Rich in courtroom drama and scandalous side stories, the trials proved truth is indeed stranger than fiction. Lurid tales of ice pick and meat cleaver killings were enhanced by accounts of gang girlfriends frolicking on beaches with celebratory killers and assisting in evidence destruction. Murder, Inc.'s unraveling was a convoluted, far-reaching affair, cast with many lead actors and dozens of supporting roles. The first men led to the electric chair were Martin Goldstein and Harry Strauss. Both convicts were convicted of first-degree murder on September 19th, 1940. Harry Mayone and Frank Abendondo saw a glimmer of hope when their convictions were overturned in 1940, only to have those hopes dashed when their first-degree murder convictions were upheld, April of 1941. Authorities whisked Reles and Tannenbaum to Los Angeles in September of 1941 to testify against Benjamin Bugsy Siegel for the 1939 murder of Harry Greenberg. Siegel was acquitted, and in New York's Nassau, Monticello, and Sullivan counties, cold cases were being re-examined and trials commenced against other syndicate associates, including, but not limited to, Irving Big Ganji Cohen and Vito Guarino. Vito Guarino, who initially went on the lam during the investigation, turned himself in later to face indictments for several murders, including the 2 plasterers, Cesar Lautaro and Antonio Siciliano. Several trials ensued, but taking advantage of plea deals, Guarino avoided the electric chair. In late 1941, Louis Lepke Buchalter, Emmanuel Mendy Weiss, and Louis Capone stood trial by jury in the Brooklyn courtroom of Judge Franklin Taylor for the first-degree murder of Joseph Rosen. The information provided by Reles and other mob turncoats such as Ali "Tick-Tock" Tannenbaum and Max Rubin resulted in a guilty verdict and sentence of death for each of the 3 defendants. Numerous other Murder, Inc. trials were underway almost simultaneously. In Essex County, New Jersey, Charles the Bug Workman went to prison for the 1935 murder of Dutch Schultz, though he is believed to have killed more than 20 people. After serving 23 years of a life sentence for the murder of the Dutchman, Workman was released in March of 1964. Abe Reles, Kid Twist. In a bizarre turn of events, the prosecution's star witness went out the window of his 6th-floor hotel room at the Half Moon Hotel in the early morning hours of November 12, 1941. Reles, who was in protective custody with other witnesses at the time, was scheduled to testify in the most polarized of the Murder, Inc. trials against his former boss, Louis Buchalter. The event surrounding Reles' death remains a mystery still today, as some believe he was murdered by the syndicate, while others believed he fell to his death in a failed escape attempt. With the defection of Abe Reles, Ali Tannenbaum, Seymour Magoon, Abe Pretty Levine, and Sholem Bernstein, and the conviction and execution of many of its subjects, the demise of the murder machine, established by Charles Lucky Luciano and the Commission 10 years earlier, had at last come to an end.